I am from a small town, the kind where you are in the same class with the same kids from preschool through graduation. I was never popular and had my fair share of bullies, but never as bad as one kid in my class, Max. He was on the shorter side and had these little round glasses with his hair slicked to the side like he was right out of a movie cast as a stereotypical nerd. He kept to himself and didn't really interact with others if he could avoid it. Fast forward to 8th grade, when we were paired as lab partners and had to sit at the same table together every day for the entire year. I considered myself a nice person and always went out of my way to make sure that I wasn't rude to people, especially people who hadn't done anything to deserve it. So of course, I was friendly and happy to be his partner as long as he did his fair share of the work. The year came and went. He was shy but polite, and we got along fine being partners. 9th grade started, and I had a lot of troubles at home with my birth father, so I chose to move in with my mother a few towns over. I was only about 30 minutes away, but I had to start a completely new school a month into my freshman year, and it was scary. I may not have been popular at my last school, but I did have several friends whom I loved and missed dearly. My mom would often drive me to the other town to see my friends and hang out, and I also started making new friends at my new school. It was a good setup, and I continued this way until I was 16 and could drive by myself. I never heard anything from Max, and honestly, I had kind of forgotten about him. That was until my junior year of high school. I started casually seeing this other guy, Jack, from my hometown, and he asked me to go with him to prom. I was excited and happy to say yes, as I would get to spend the night with him and my friends from childhood. A couple of months before my prom, my mother told me there was a new lady at her job, and she was asking about me because her grandson was seeing me, and she wanted a picture so that she could put a frame to my name. My mother knew Jack and knew this wasn't her grandmother, so she asked his name, and wouldn't you know it, it was Max. My mother showed her a picture of me that she had on her desk, and the lady went on her way. A few weeks later, she asked for the color of my prom dress so that she knew what to get Max, so we matched. My mother was confused but told her it was pink. About 2 weeks before prom, some of my friends from my hometown told me that Max had been telling some people that we were going to the dance together and that he was so excited. I thought it was creepy, but I didn't put too much thought into it. The night of prom, I picked Jack and we headed over to the school, only to find Max and his grandmother waiting outside the entrance so that she could take pictures of us before we go in. I was not one to disappoint people, so I politely took a couple of pictures with him as my actual date stood off to the side and waited. If Max's grandmother was confused that I had another date, she didn't show it. The rest of the night went smoothly, and Jack and I had a great time. We didn't see Max anymore and assumed that he had left. Other than his grandmother telling my mom that he lost my number and trying to get it for him, which she thankfully didn't do, I didn't hear much from him until we graduated. I went to a state college, and I had heard that he had gotten into a well-respected private university. Everything was fine for the first few weeks of college. And then, I ran into him. He caught me on the way to class one day, and I was polite and asked him if he was a student here too, which he was, and I chatted with him for a minute before hurrying off to class. It was a relatively harmless interaction, but still creeped me out a bit since I knew he got into that other school and wondered why he chose to go to a state college. For the next few months, I ran into him almost daily. He always wanted to talk and never seemed to be with anyone else. I found out from some girls in my dorm that he had been hanging around, asking about me and trying to figure out my class schedule and where I would be and when. He also told them that he was my boyfriend, and he passed up a scholarship to another college to come here and be with me instead. They figured out he was lying when they never saw us together for long periods or him up in the rooms with me, and stopped answering his questions. I left at the end of the semester to move home and take classes at a nearby school. I didn't tell him, obviously. The following year, I got married to my boyfriend from my senior of high school. Dumb, I know. Anyway, we were in his small town, which is in the same county as my hometown, for a fair shortly after the wedding. While walking around and enjoying ourselves, I see Max staring at us at the end of the block. It was the first time I had been genuinely fearful of him, as the look on his face was nothing short of hatred. I tried to ignore him and went on about my night, seeing him a few more times, always with that look on his face. The next few years passed, with me hearing nothing from him at all. I didn't even know if he still lived around the area or not, and I found out a little while after that he did when I started working at a clothing store in town, and he would stop in and sit in that dad chair next to the door for all the guys to hang out in while their people shopped. I mentioned it to my manager because of our history and the fact that he would stare at me constantly while sitting there, but he always came in with a girl. I later found out it was his sister, so they didn't think too much of it. He never spoke to me and just stared. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved to a city in my home state, but several hours away from my small town. I am 30 now and doing well in life, other than a random Facebook friend request, which I rejected. I haven't heard from him, and I hope that it stays that way. Hi everyone. I'm really writing this out as a way to vent because I'm in a situation where I feel really stuck. Any advice is appreciated, but I'm not sure there's anything that can be said that will actually help. I've tried just about everything, and I'm going to start from the beginning. This is a story 2 years in the making, so I'll try to be as thorough as possible. In 2019, I graduated with my master's degree and moved to a relatively rural area for my PhD. Thinking we'd make an investment, my dad and I purchased a house. The intent was to rent it out once I completed my PhD. This house was only a block away from a dive bar where my dad was able to make some pretty good friends. He introduced me to everyone, and everyone let me know that I would be so happy in my new house because my next door neighbor was the absolute nicest guy you could ever meet. So we met the neighbor, and he did seem nice enough. He suggested that we exchange number just in case that I ever needed anything, and I thought that was a good idea. What's the worst that could happen? A few days later, my dad left to go back to his home in another state, and I was left to my own devices. Literally the day he left, it started. My neighbor texted me while I was away and let me know that he left a gift for me on my front porch. In this text exchange, he started using pet names like Sweetie and Cutie, and I went home and he had left a hand-painted feeding dish for my cats in my mailbox. At this point, I wasn't that alarmed. He was just being nice, I thought. The next day, he sent me more texts with pet names, and I took the opportunity to make sure that he knew I wasn't interested in anything romantic. He replied back with a rambling text about how all a person ever needs is friends, and he would like to be friends with me. After that, he would send me texts frequently. Everything from inviting me for fishing to telling me he left more gifts on my porch. I would often not reply, or I would tell him that I'm busy. I didn't want to be rude, but I also had no interest in any sort of relationship with him other than neighborly. One night, I got a text from the manager of the bar down the street letting me know that if my neighbor knocked on my door, I shouldn't answer. She then told me that my neighbor had walked down to the bar with a hatchet and told the bartender he was hearing voices that got louder as he got closer to the bar. He threatened to kill someone with a hatchet if the voices didn't stop. They called the police, and the police took the hatchet from him, but made no arrest. The manager of the bar picked me up, and I spent the night at her house. She told me that the police said my neighbor was on meth. After that, I tried to keep my distance even more. But things got even weirder. One day, I went out to my car to find a dead squirrel in my driveway. This squirrel had very clearly been run over and moved to right in front of my driver's side door. I just stepped over it, got in my car, and left. When I returned home, the squirrel was gone. Shortly after, I received a text from my neighbor that said, "Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you." I felt like this was a weird way to word this, and I suspect he's the one who put the squirrel in my driveway. Another time, I walked out of my house to see that he had placed an unspent shotgun shell on the bricks in his front yard. He came out and told me that it was to serve as a warning for anyone walking between our houses. For the next couple of months, I did my best to avoid him. He would text me inviting me over, and I would come up with an excuse or just ignore him completely. I wanted to remain cordial since he was my neighbor, but it was getting very annoying and I was uncomfortable. He would text me as soon as I got home, telling me that he was watching me come and go from my house. And around Halloween, he handcrafted a large casket and wrote, "Here lies the last son of a bitch who played mind games. November 2012. What the fuck? All this time still sending me texts. Eventually, I got fed up and I stopped responding completely. Less than 2 weeks after I stopped responding completely, he threw a 15-pound flower pot at my front door. You know those big concrete planters? Yeah, one of those. I called the police who advised me to get a stalking no-contact order. A few days later, I was watching TV when a notification popped up that my neighbor was trying to cast a video to my screen. I declined it twice, and I filed another report with the police. During this time, I started the process of getting a stalking no-contact order. I saw 3 different victim advocates who all told me different things. I went out of town for a conference, and during that time, someone had attempted to break into my home. I had an ADT security system, so while they didn't succeed, I was aware of the attempt. After the conference, I came home to the entire world shutting down because of COVID. I was trapped in my home 24/7 with my stalker neighbor next door. Luckily, Court proceedings for protection orders didn't stop, and right before court, he sent me a text telling me that he was sorry for what he'd done. That he could tell when he saw me outside that he made me uncomfortable. Then, he went on to tell me that he can tell my hairs has gotten longer and that I look beautiful. I went to court and provided all the evidence that I had, the timeline of everything that had ever happened, and the text he'd sent me asking if I wanted a massage. The text I sent him telling him that the way he was speaking to me was inappropriate, and the text saying that he knew he made me uncomfortable. I told the judge that I suspected that he had attempted to break into my house while I was out of town. The kicker is, he didn't deny any of it. Actually, he told the judge that he took full accountability for everything. He said he was in recovery and he was trying to turn over a new leaf. He didn't oppose the protection order at all. So in March 2020, I actually received the stalking no contact order. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, he did some weird shit, but that's because he's a weird guy. It wasn't anything that made me fear for my safety. That is, until he got on drugs again. At this time, we found an unspent shotgun casing in my flower bed. It was consistent with the one he had previously used to send a warning. This occurred a couple months after I started dating my boyfriend, and I suspect it was a warning to him. After this, and for a variety of reasons, my boyfriend moved in with me. He moved in pretty quickly, but everything turned out fine. We're still together, and as happy in our relationship as we can be. New Year's 2021, I was awoken to yelling. I turned on my security cameras and got footage of him sticking his head out his window and screaming obscenities at my bedroom window for about 7 minutes. It doesn't sound like a long time, but when your stalker is screaming threats and obscenities, 7 minutes is a long time. He called me a harlot. He said, "Happy fucking New Year." He said he was going to blow up his house with his gas line, and I called the police who responded. They told me that he never said my name, so they can't prove it was a violation of the protection order. The officer said, and I quote, "There's nothing illegal about yelling in your own house." And they left without even speaking to him. All I could do at this point was do my best to avoid him. I parked on the street because my driveway is pretty close to his front porch. I got used to living with my curtains drawn and always made sure that my cameras were charged, all 5 of them. Yes, because of him, I spent over $1,000 on cameras. Every inch of my yard is covered. And since then, he's been seen by me and by other neighbors talking to people who aren't there. Going outside and screaming nonsense, things like, "I have Cheerios on my necklace," or "I'll put my penis in your butt." And I'm not even joking. This basically brings me to last week. In the morning, I was getting ready for that day when I heard screaming. "Someone is going to die over this sweatshirt." I turned on the cameras and I got footage of him walking around the alley behind my house screaming. "Are you fucking proud? How about I get my shotgun? I'll get everybody all fired up." I called the police, and once again, they didn't charge him with violation of the protection order. Instead, they gave him an ordinance violation for disturbing the peace. The police told me that it seems like his office medication again, and that was that. They left. Last night, I was awoken to hammering outside my window at 1 a.m. He was cutting down his privacy fence horizontally. I called the police for a noise complaint, and they just told him to stop, and that was that. As I write this, he is outside, continuing to horizontally cut down his privacy fence. That means the privacy fence only stands about 3 feet tall now. This was the one thing that made me feel relatively safe about hanging out in my backyard. And now that's gone. All of this is to say, I'm fucking tired. I just want to live in a house where I can be sure that my neighbor won't try to kill me, where I can feel confident that he's not going to try to break in. My boyfriend and I are trying to buy a house to move, but it's difficult. I'm a PhD student, so I don't make very much money. Renting won't work because I have 4 cats, and finding a place to rent with so many animals is difficult, if not impossible. I refuse to rehome them, so maybe it's partially my fault that I'm stuck in this situation. My dad has agreed to co-sign on another mortgage, and I've gotten a second job. We should be able to save up enough money within a few months, but until then, I'm stuck. I just don't know what else to do. I'm tired and I'm angry, so I figured I'd write this to vent. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading it. There's still so many different instances that I've left out. I'm just so exhausted. This happened about 2 years ago with my wife. She's 25 and female. My wife and I also 25 and a female, were hiking at a park on a pretty popular trail at about 9:30 a.m. with our little dog. It isn't deserted, but it isn't super packed at that time. My wife and I get in a petty argument about something to do with the dog, and she ends up walking a bit ahead of me with the dog to cool off. She's ahead enough to think that we are not together, but not so far as to not see me in her peripheral vision. She checks back on me consistently, but for the most part, we don't speak to each other. This goes on for maybe 10-ish minutes, and as we come upon a bridge from the dirt road, my wife turns around to check up on me once again, and I see her face change. And she's walking the maybe 5 feet back towards me, fucking angry. I immediately am already thinking that we are going to hash out whatever argument we were having again. Until I realize she's looking at something behind me, and I hear her very loudly say, "Can I help you?" And I whirl around, and I almost bump into someone. For reference, I'm about 5'2", and my whole life, I'm used to looking behind my back. I'm very feminine. No matter how angry I was, I still usually would have heard if anyone was approaching me. But a man more than a foot taller than me was almost flushed against my back. His hair is pulled back into a ponytail, and he looks like the definition of the stereotype of a thin neckbeard. He looks greasy and has stains on his orange polo and shorts combo. He gets very close to me, putting his face very close to my face. "Sorry, I thought I knew you," he says, only looking at me. I laugh uncomfortably. "No, sorry." I have a smile on my face, trying to de-escalate as much as I can, but I'm freaking out because how could I have not heard this guy on this loud fucking trail? Sorry, you just look familiar," he says, still really fucking close to me. My wife steps between us and pushes the guy away. My wife is a trained MMA fighter and even had sponsorships for a few years. and is the more masculine out of the two of us. "She said she doesn't know you, bro," she says, and if looks could kill, hers would have. The guy pays no attention to my wife and continues looking at me. "You just look so familiar," he repeats, and tries to get close to us again. "Hey man, get the fuck away from her. She said she doesn't know you." My wife isn't shouting, but her voice is deadly fucking serious. She hands me the leash of our dog, who has been growling at this man since my wife came over. My dog is stupid friendly and has never growled at anyone in his life. This guy puts his hands up like those football players that have done nothing wrong. Right, sorry again. And he runs off back the way we came. The creepiest part? As he runs down the dirt path, his steps make no noise. A week later, around the same place, I find one of those beaded bracelets with the same name Kayla on them. So, let's not meet. This takes place over the course of a few years, from just before my university freshman year to my junior year. I am now a 20-year-old female, but at the start of this story, I was 17. For my freshman orientation, my family and I were staying at a hotel across from my college campus. Orientation started in the morning, so I wandered over to campus with my luggage to check into my dorm room for the next few days. I was roomed alone for orientation since I have OCD and sleeping problems, and I didn't want to bother any potential roommates. So I put my luggage away and began walking the campus. This entire fiasco started for one reason. I wanted breakfast. It was foggy that morning, and I had never been on campus. It was ways away from my hometown, so I quickly became turned around. I spotted a group of 4 people walking toward a building, so I swallowed my anxiety and approached them to ask for directions. I should add that I'm a shy and quiet person, so it took a bit before I piped up and, "Excuse me?" One of the 4 turned around, and my immediate thought was, "Oh my god, this guy looks like a fish." He had big, creepy eyes and fat lips. He was blonde and a little chubby. This is purely for descriptive purposes, and I am by no means a model. Still, I stifled my gawking and asked, "Do you know where the dining hall is?" "Oh, yeah, it's right there." He motioned to the building directly behind us. "Oh, wow, I'm dumb." I laughed. There was a small pause before he asked, "You here alone?" As someone who has run into predatory people before, this question never, ever sits well with me. "My family will be here later. We all have sleeping problems, so they're catching up on sleep. They'll be here at 6. This wasn't a lie, but I hoped it would deter him from latching onto me. "Oh, well, do you want to sit with us?" I guessed that he meant the group of 4 he was in, but the other 3 had already disappeared into the dining hall. Sure," I conceded. He immediately grabbed a 2-person table, which made me internally groan. I had a feeling of where this was going, and I wanted no part of it. I'm a lesbian, for Christ's sake. I didn't want to risk making him angry, and I didn't want someone to hate me before the school year even started. So I sat down with him and a plate of eggs. I tried to make conversation, but he kept replying dryly with things like, "Oh, and, I thought that I had upset Fish Face, so I looked up from my plate to see him staring directly at my breast. I'm a 36 double D, so I'm unfortunately used to this. I sighed and bagged out my sweater around my chest. Even after this and me slouching, he just kept staring. After this, I didn't want anything to do with him, but I wasn't so lucky. Everywhere I went, he followed. Even if our orientation events were separate, I repeatedly tried to slip away from him, becoming increasingly creeped out by his attempts at flirting. But everywhere I went, there was Fish Face. I gave it one last try, slipping away to the library. That's when the messages started. Somehow, Fish Face found my Snapchat. I guess that he searched my name, and he kept messaging things like, "Where are you? Where did you go? I'm at this location." Knowing that he could see that I'd read them, I felt obligated to respond. "Okay, I'll be there soon." This didn't stop with orientation. The beginning of my freshman year was marred with Fish Face encounters, classes, trips to the store, student activities. It didn't matter. He was there, shadowing me. The constant messaging drove me to just delete my Snapchat. Thank Christ, he never got my phone number. At this point, Fish Face was incessantly hitting on me and reminding me of how much he liked me, despite numerous times of me stating that I am not interested. When I made myself clear, it only seemed to make him push harder, as if he thought that I was playing games with him. It became more and more common for him to put his arm around me or try to hold my hand. This is where I drew the line. I told him, clear as day, that I am not interested in you and that I do not like men and to do not touch me. He pouted, but relented, touching me at least. The shadowing only got worse, to the point that I couldn't leave without my roommate. I couldn't get a single dorm for the actual school year, and I became more exhausted, paranoid, and felt like he was a time bomb waiting to blow. After weeks of this, weeks of sheer anxiety, I spoke to a priest at my university. The father was deeply concerned and went so far as to walk me back to my dorm. He made me promise that I would speak to security first thing the next day, which I agreed to. Security's first question was if I was really being stalked or if my anxiety made me believe that I was being stalked. When I cited the witnesses to his shadowing me, that was dropped. Then the question was I clear enough with him? I don't know how much clearer I could have been. After much back and forth, I managed to get a no-contact order against Fish Face. I knew that a no-contact order only meant that he couldn't contact me and vice versa, rather than physically keeping him away from me. I was okay with this because at this point, I did not want to hurt this guy or potentially impact his future. For the remainder of that year, there were no more attempts to contact me or be near me, and I thought that that would be the end of it. But then came sophomore year. I could never be sure if it was a coincidence or he was actually tailing me. But then he started appearing outside of every classroom door, every coffee place, and absolutely everywhere. I was in a rough place this year, totally unrelated to this, but it certainly didn't help. But due to the sheer emotional exhaustion that I was battling, I couldn't give a damn. Okay, follow me. I promise that I am not that interesting. But this is when I learned of the other victims. Their stories were identical to mine. 6 of them, mine being the 7th. They ran into Fish Face, a totally innocent encounter. But then he started in on them, bombarding them with messages, following them, groping them, and trying to get them alone. I was horrified to find that every one of these other girls had reported him to university security. Every one of them was prescribed a no-contact order. 7 victims later, and this bastard was still on campus as if nothing happened. I learned that this was not uncommon for our university. On top of victim blaming, the more I learned, the more deeply my fear ran. It was open season, and these bastards had full protection. We could not do a thing to get guys like Fishface off our campus. And so I resigned myself to being followed by this fucker. Junior year came around, and initially, it seemed that Fishface had given up, but I could not have been more wrong. It was pointed out to me by my friends who knew about the stalking that he was in the background of my every move. Throughout the year, he got closer and closer, until it became worse than I'd ever dealt with before. I was a member of Campus Conservationist, and we were selling reusable grocery bags in lieu of our state banning plastic bags. And then, after about 45 minutes of peace, I glanced to my right. He was there, just around the corner, staring directly at me. Ice-cold fear ran down my spine and my stomach dropped. I tore my gaze away and tried to hide my panic. He hadn't been this close to me since freshman year, and there was no mistaking it. He was here for me and me alone. I texted my girlfriend, letting her know what was happening, and I will be honest and say that the rest is a blur. I was too panicked to remember how we got back to my dorm safely, and I thank God every day for my ultra-protective girlfriend. Just 2 days after that, he appeared in the hallway outside of my class. It was just reaching the end and I was ready to call it a day. I glanced at my watch. It was 2:45 p.m. I wandered to the bathroom, ignoring Fishface lurking in the corner, and I did my business and approached the door. It began to open, so I called out, "Oh, I got it," and opened it for the next person. Fishface. I felt my face go pale and my breath hitch. He stared directly at me with those creepy-ass blue eyes. His giant, floppy lips pulled into a small smirk before he turned and disappeared down the hall. My heart thumped in my chest as I re-entered the classroom. I felt myself shaking and tried to hide it. All that kept running through my head was, what was he doing? Why was he trying to get in the bathroom? I glanced down at my watch again and knew that I didn't have to wait for my girlfriend as the class was minutes from ending. I asked the girl next to me to walk with me to my next class, and she agreed without hesitation. She was a really sweet girl to begin with, and I thank God for that. I finished my final class for the day and sped back to my dorm, and I didn't get much sleep that night. I reported the incidences to security the next morning, and I was met with the same pressing questions and doubts. I threw everything I had at them and asked them to watch the security cameras outside of my classroom to see him attempt to corner me in the bathroom. I had to threaten to contact state police before they relented a promise to investigate my claims. They informed me that no action would be taken. They said that they could find no evidence of the incidences. When questioned, Fishface said that him appearing around my classrooms and frequented spots around campus was purely coincidental, and he felt so awkward that he was going through this again. I took my second semester of junior year off for unrelated reasons. Yet, I am relieved to not be on campus with that creep. He is still there, and the other victims have mostly transferred to other universities due to the college's general mistreatment and poor administration. I start my senior year this August at the same university, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if he's going to step up his game. I listen to enough true crime to know what could happen, and it scares me like few things ever have. So Fishface, you disgusting motherfucker, let's not meet again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.